Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim Jousma, and with me as always, we have the Reverend Tracy. How you doing? I can't
We're
talk.
staunch professionals here at
Yeah.
Friends Talking Nerdy Friend Talk. See, I'll just mess up right next to you. I totally did that with the organization, by the way. I was doing an interview and I fucked up the name, and that's a proud moment. So don't worry, we've all been there. Yeah. So how's your week going, Tim?
Oh man, it has been a busy week. This is essentially finals week for school, so putting the finishing touches on a 5-page paper that I had to do for a comic book class about Jerry Siegel, the creator of Superman. And so, I mean, as you know, Tracy, that character means a lot to me and whatnot. But just I've been wanting to get that right. So I'm not the type of writer that can spew out like 1,000 words every time I go to a typewriter. It could be torturous at times. So being able to get it right has been really tough, but it's getting there. So right now I'm at the finishing touches. But how about you?
Oh, I'm just within the 28-day mark of us wheels up and going across the country. So we will famously be from Portland to Portland here at Friends Talking Nerdy. I'm just busy. So my PSA to all my friends is, if I'm not talking to you right now, I'm so sorry. I probably saw your text in the middle of doing one of any hundred of things and just forgot to respond later. But I will promise to be a good friend again when my brain is not taken up by moving. I actually just had this talk with Tim before we went live because he had sent me like a cool app. And I was like, I will totally check it out. You just might have to remind me, put a pin in that for message for 30 days.
Yes. Well, today is a special recording here because it is Pride Month. We wanted to talk about the importance of Pride Month and the various things related to that. So with that, we do have a guest today. So good Reverend, explain to us who this guest is.
So this guest is somebody I got to know at a prior workspace. I try not to name the name of the places that I work at because not all of my stories have been great. But this person has always been really nice. And I will actually let them more introduce themselves because something I did want to touch on later perhaps is pronouns. So that is why I'm skirting around that issue very intentionally right now to be respectful. But this is my friend Elias, and we met through work. And I became friends with Elias on Facebook and noticed a lot of their posts. And so that is why when I tried to think of, do I know any friends who be cool to kind of talk to, in general during Pride Week, first one that came to mind was this person. So hi, Elias. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. So yeah, I'm Elias. I go by he, him pronouns, and I'm super queer. So very excited for Pride, even though it's 94 degrees in Portland right now. Yeah.
Kind of hot, but after living a decade in Sacramento, California, this is nothing. Count your blessings.
Yeah, got me there.
Yeah. Well, to start off, anybody that comes on the show for the first time must answer this question. So here it is. What, Elias, is your nerd origin story?
Gosh. So it dates back to the time that Netflix was actually mailing you DVDs. And apparently they still do this. But my dad, when I was about 11 or 12, started getting the Star Trek original series discs. And we would watch them, and I just absolutely fell in love. And so I went from Star Trek TOS to TNG Picture, which I extra fell in love with, then Enterprise, then J.J. Abrams made his movies, and I was pissed about it. But pretty much Star Trek has been my absolute nerd journey. Everything about Star Trek, I've read books, read novels. I take in as much Star Trek content as I possibly can.
Nice.
So yeah.
What would you say is your favorite Star Trek movie? And why is it Wrath of Khan?
Oh my gosh. So it is Wrath of Khan, and it's because of the connection between Kirk and Spock. But I also really do like First Contact, which is the only good TNG movie. But
there's I gotta No, I just hate the Borg. I mean, I just hate the Borg. Even when they were first introduced, what was the end of season 3 with the two-parter episode? I just have always hated them. But I got a soft spot for Generations, I guess. Just being the last time that we saw William Shatner play Captain Kirk, that you can't go wrong there. And of course, with Wrath of Khan, how could you not love Ricardo Montalban just chewing up the scenery? Am I right?
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
Iconic.
Yes.
Meanwhile, the Reverend's over here just like, yeah, guys, I think
Nerd
that played
stuff.
in the background. At some point in my childhood, I think that was on.
You better get on that. Good stuff.
I just know if they're wearing a red shirt, don't get attached.
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah. All right. So I guess with Pride Week and everything coming up, one thing I kind of wanted to see about talking about is I have always kind of been curious about some of the journey that leads to deciding to transition. So you're post-transition, from what I understand?
Well, post-transition is an interesting term. I would say, yeah, that in terms of me personally, I am done transitioning right now. I started testosterone when I was 20, and I'm 26 now. But that isn't even when I started my transition, right? I mean, that's something that started long, long before. So I don't think transitioning is actually something that has a pretty clear start or end point. So, in a few years, I could change my mind and want to do more, or, it's still pretty open. But yeah, I have been transitioning for 6 years now. I guess 5.5, 6.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I was going to just simply ask, what started that process for you? What led you to the point to where you decided it is right for me to transition?
Yeah. It was a long time coming. When I was a young kid, I have pretty explicit memories of wanting to be a boy. And I liked boy things. I wanted to play with the guys, and I grew up in a really Christian and conservative environment where I really wasn't allowed to. I mean, at school, especially in elementary school, they had us sit at different lunch tables between boys and girls. Like, we couldn't even interact. And so that always confused me. And then, as I got older, there were some expectations put on me as a seemingly feminine person to act a certain way, dress a certain way. And it definitely made me uncomfortable. And in high school, I remember I was in my room, I was 17, and I had known one trans person, and it just kind of hit me. At that point I had come out as bisexual, but and I had started dressing masculine, and I was sitting in my room, and I was just kind of thinking, about my journey at that point, and I realized it all kind of fit together, and I didn't know what to do. It just seemed so daunting, like such a big thing for a teenager to learn that, it was now possible that every single person I loved would never want to speak to me again. And I already had gone through that with being bi, and now there was a whole other level. So that's when but I didn't do anything. And then in college, that's when I decided to actually take the step and, start going by a different name and then taking testosterone.
Yeah, very much. I totally relate to so much of that. Something that I have joked about is I think I was like maybe a decision or two away of being somebody who may have decided to transition. I was same thing. Like, I wanted to do all the boy things. And then what didn't help for me that was double confusing with some of the gender roles. And what I like to call it is being viewed as a vagina person. Because really, I mean, but some of the weirdness there was like being a country girl, but at the same time, I wasn't supposed to meet the exact same stereotypes as the girly girls. Like, I couldn't be too girly, but I couldn't be too masculine either. And especially when I really leaned so hard to some of that. I was also like one of the boys that played with the boys. Like we played like war and met on piles of junk wood to have epic battles, and they were like under my command. Like I didn't want to play in the kitchen, like, so there was some of that going on too. And it really got worse, like, and I feel like I noticed more of the weird gender role stuff like when I moved, because then I wasn't in the country anymore, and I so didn't fit in like anywhere. So big time can relate to some of the, you know, Bible Belt is where I'm from myself. So yeah. And so went through all of that. Tim, did you have another question or?
No, I thought you were.
Okay, cool. No, I'm totally riffing off this conversation because I think it's a cool one to be having. But so you did decide to go by a different name and to complete, like, to start, you know, with hormone therapy, and like how so did that happen here in Oregon or another state, I guess?
So that happened in another state. I went to college in Georgia. I lived in Atlanta, which is a great city. And actually my plan, you know, I knew I was going to move to Portland eventually. And so my plan was to wait because I just couldn't stomach it. I have really bad anxiety. And so at that point, and I wasn't on any kind of medication for my anxiety. And I just couldn't handle the stress that it put on me to even imagine transitioning in my world at that time.
Yeah. So everybody, like the family
decided,
and stuff.
My family, my friends, just, and my family especially. You know, I mean, I was close to my family, and my family had said in the past things like, because I think they knew, you know, and so they would mention, you know, if you ever became a boy, like that would be really disappointing. And we hope you don't do anything gross to your body. Just like comments like that. And which is a weird thing to say to your kid just randomly, but that's because I think that they knew and they were self-protecting.
Right.
So I had a lot of fear. But what actually changed my mind was I got on anxiety medication. That made my anxiety manageable. And then I was like, you know what? This is something I need now. I can't wait. And so I did. Yeah, I decided to start transitioning while in Georgia.
Now, kind of walk us through that process. How did that start for you? I know you got conservative folks out there that will try to grossly oversimplify the process in order to make their nonsense sound legit. Walk us through what that was like for you.
Do you mean specifically the process mentally, or the actual like process of going to the doctor and getting starting the?
Well, let's go with. I'd say let's go with both. Yeah, I mean,
okay.
I know. I was curious because even like if you changed your gender, you know, on anything specific on any records, I'm also curious about that too, because these are the questions that I haven't had to look up. So yeah, emotionally or through the logistics, whichever one you want to go with first.
Well, so mentally, it's funny. I mean, let's just talk nerdy. I was at the time in a statistics class in college, and so I literally created like a table of basically all of my emotions. I datafied my emotions, and I was like, okay, do I want to today? Yes, I want to transition. Okay, cool. But then the next day I was like, no, that's too scary. I don't want to do it. Okay, and then I literally every day I would track, what my average emotion was like throughout, the month, how it was changing. I would make notes on why it was changing because I just could not sort out my own feelings. So I basically had to quantify it in some way I could not understand until I went to therapy, and that was really helpful. So anxiety medicine and therapy was very helpful.
Yeah. See, I'm big fans of both of those things. Anybody that's listened to the show knows that I'm a big proponent of mental hygiene.
Absolutely. But so that was actually, to go into the actual logistics, that was the first step, was to find a gender therapist. And I feel like nowadays, especially in Portland, almost all therapists, well, I'll say this. In Portland, I know almost all therapists are trained in some way to deal with gender issues. In Georgia, I had to find a specific therapist who knew about this.
I bet that was kind
And
of tough there.
yeah, and in Atlanta it wasn't so bad. I met a guy who was trans himself, and I came in there and I told him, hey, like, I don't want you to convince me either way, because I don't know. Like, I'm in this process where I know that I'm trans, but I don't know what that means for me in terms of my future. And he just helped me work through my feelings. But he ended up moving, so I had to get a new therapist, who was this woman who I would describe as a gatekeeper. And she was interesting because she was a good therapist, but she was the only therapist in the suburbs of Georgia who dealt with trans youth. And so she considered herself the expert, charged a lot of money, wouldn't bill your insurance, and told you that you had to see her at least 3 months, once a week, before she would write you a letter. And your letter was the only way that you could get hormones.
Got it.
Which I understand, right? Like, but we're talking $120 to $150 a session for at least 3 months before she would consider it.
And by the way, like, from what I understand, the reason that is because they are supposed to be genuinely trying to differentiate the difference between a body dysmorphia issue and like a legitimate transgender like situation. Totally. But yeah, that's a long time for, like, because to me that reads, I'm going to need at least this number of months to figure this out, and I'm like, that's a long time to figure out something like that, like, because it's very individual to the patient. So yeah, I could see that kind of being a little bit of a red flaggish, but at least you're able to find somebody.
Yeah, and like the thing with her was she was very traditional. So right, so like the fact that I still liked some feminine things kind of made her like almost confused about, like, it's not like I think that set me back at all, like she wasn't going to write me a letter, but she just seemed, she would almost, I don't know. I don't know what her problem was, but that was like a negative thing for her. The fact that I still liked men also confused her. She was so used, especially in, I guess, Georgia, if she saw trans men, they were straight. Because that was, you know, the epitome of manhood, was to be a masculine guy who liked girls. And so her, as a cisgender woman, or, you know, a woman who was assigned female at birth and had always lived her life as a woman, she was stuck in so many of these norms that I did not fit into. And that, I think, caused some frustration in our work. But eventually I did get the letter. And I saw a doctor in Atlanta who was the only doctor in Atlanta that wasn't working with like a big university. So like a doctor easy to get into, a general practitioner kind of doctor. Right. And he gave me testosterone, and surprisingly, that was easy. I walk in, he said, "Do you have the letter?" I said, "Yep." He said, "Why do you want T?" I said, "Because I'm a guy." And he was like, "Cool. We need your blood work, and then you can come back in a couple of weeks for your first shot."
All right.
Which is a lot easier than a lot of people have gone through, right? It just so happened that I lived in Atlanta. You know, if I lived anywhere else, it could have been more confusing. But
yeah, I feel like Texas definitely falls on that a little bit more confusing. Dallas, like, I don't feel like has been as embracing as it kind of has in more recent years. I know, like, for me, it wasn't even brought up as a possibility. Like, I think the most my Christian family were, quote, worried about was me, you know, quote, having the gay, because that's how they feel down there. I will always appreciate the state that I'm from, but there's just some simple facts about it, at least how it was like in the 80s and 90s and through the early aughts, that, you know, I left for a reason. We'll just say we had our disagreements, but I think they're doing a little better now, but not really, because I know they've just, like,
with the fly eating Ted Cruz. Come on.
Oh God, Ted Cruz, catch flights, not feelings, right?
Well, I think, is it Texas has one of those trans laws that are out and about? You know, there's a few states that have these laws.
I think they recently were one of the states that signed into law banning trans girls in high school sports.
Gotcha.
I just know it wasn't really talked about as an option. So for me, like, growing up, and it never crossed my mind, like, for the longest time. I just always felt like, oh, God made a mistake. Like, I just always remember feeling that in the back of my head, like, I was supposed to be a dude. Like, clearly there was, like, forgot to hit the dude switch, like, when I went through that part of the conveyor belt. And, like, just, I accidentally got spat out with, like, the wrong parts. And that was really just genuinely, that was how, whenever I felt comfortable explaining it to people, that was how I felt about it. And then I think it really just comes from, like, I don't really like to take any medication. I don't really like the idea of, like, unnecessary surgeries, but that's because I've never had a surgery. Like, to me, having exactly, right? Like, that really does surprise a lot of people. I've got my tonsils, my adenoids, my appendix, everything. The only thing I've had was I had a little lipoma tumor cut out of my ankle once, but that's it. So the idea of doing anything like that, like, for me personally, and I would never put that on anybody else. Like, I don't think anybody making choices on their body is A, any of my business, and B, it doesn't mean anything about my own choices either. So I think my own choices just kind of led towards, like, I'm cool with not doing surgery. And then that led to the whole other, like, yeah, I think I'm glad that I didn't, because I feel like I'm more non-binary than necessarily being a guy. Now, I didn't have any form of specialized therapist to help me navigate that, though. But it does sound like that would have been helpful, like, in my case, had I started to see somebody, you know, having somebody to have some awareness of these things. So I think it's kind of good to hear that there's, you know, at least counseling, youth counseling available. Because I don't know, what year did you graduate high school?
2013.
Okay, see, so I'm 10 years before you. So I think that's more of the difference 10 years can make.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, God, absolutely.
See, I forget how much older I am than some of my friends sometimes, so my bad.
No, that's fair. I grew up in a weird space, because, I mean, I was graduating right when, you know, queer issues were kind of really coming to light. Like, remember all those youth suicides that were going on, and people just really seemed to care all of a sudden, and which is good. I mean, it took children dying for people to give a crap, but yeah, what you were talking about, I mean, is a good point that, you know, the trans experience is certainly not linear. Like, you know, non-binary people can take hormones, they cannot. Trans men can never take hormones, they can never have surgery. I mean, there's kind of an infinite number of ways to transition and get there. Mine just happens to be, I guess, more the traditional route.
Like, I don't think there's just one answer, right? Because I know the one thing that I've toyed with is like possibly like a breast reduction or something, right? Because I've got no attachment to them, and they literally just get in my way. So and I've talked about it, but then it every time I talk about it, it goes back to but I've never had surgery. So maybe if I, like, have to have surgery, like, on an emergency level, then that'll be, like, you know, my first time will be finally done, and then maybe I'll be less scared of it. So I'm glad that I've had these talks with my partner. Because I definitely think having, like, supportive partnership to understand that there are, you know, like you said, you're done today, but you might make decisions later. And I guess in my identity, I feel the same way, but, you know, knowing that it can be flexible, and that doesn't mean that you're not authentic for some reason. Like, it's funny to me that I feel like people just expected you to somehow know exactly all of the answers to the questions on your identity. Like, oh, you must be awakened to completely who you are now, so spotlight. And it's like, oh no, it took me like a couple of decades to figure some of this shit out. So oh, go ahead, Tim.
I was going to say, with Elias, I mean, you mentioned having your therapist talk to you about being confused about what she considered gender norms. How many of the quote-unquote gender norms out there are legit, I guess, and how many are just a concept of society that we've decided upon? And how destructive is that, I guess?
That is, like, the ultimate question. I go back and forth. When I was in college and taking sociology class, I was like, no, gender is a construct, which I think it totally is. Like, every society seems to have some have big variations, some have little variations. However, there are some things when I started taking testosterone, I was like, all right, men aren't joking about this. When you're going through puberty, you are horny. How sexual can I get? You are horny
no, we're fine.
all the time. You are horny and hungry. And that is just hormones. Like, and certainly some men don't experience that to, the degree that others do. But, I mean, there was a genuine change in my body. Not because, a thing flipped in my head. And I was like, well, I'm a man now, so I need to act a certain way. Or feel a certain way, right? Like there are physical components that I don't think we can deny, but at the same time, it's not like to the extent that I think society, sometimes makes it. Like men can't help themselves or whatever. Like that's bullshit. Like it's just, some of it is harmful for sure, and then you project that onto people, like my therapist did with me. The fact that, for example, going back to what Tracy was saying, I did not have body dysphoria around my breasts. Like what I would say was, if we lived in a world where it literally did not matter, where breasts were not associated with women, then I would keep them. There is no physical feeling I have against my breasts. And that just confused her. I mean, blew her mind. She was like, oh, maybe you're non-binary. Maybe you're not actually a man. Have you considered that? And I'm like, no, like I'm a man. But I just don't. I mean, there are men with breasts. There are
I was
cis
gonna
men.
say there are men that have conditions where they have breasts, and are you trying to say that they're suddenly not men? Because I kind of find the implication a little insulting either direction.
Absolutely. Right. So, I don't want to discard like what being a man means to people, because especially trans men hold on to that identity sometimes a little, in my opinion, so strongly that it becomes toxic masculinity. Right. And I don't want masculinity to be toxic, I want it to be more than the stereotypes, which is hard. Like, especially how our society creates masculinity to be. But yeah, that was a tangent.
No, that's what we do. Our conversations sometimes take journeys, and then sometimes we actually follow our notes here. I did want to make just kind of a side comment for you. If you're curious about getting too sexual, we literally, like just a handful of episodes, interviewed what was her actual title, Tim? Because you had brought that lovely person on.
Oh, her name was Pixie, host of Next on Stage One, a podcast about strippers.
Oh.
So, yeah, we get a little saucy here.
No, they're based out of Denver.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, good to know.
Well, so kind of getting back to the topic at hand here, though, like, so I find it really interesting because so now that I know that we've got like a decade of difference, I'm like, oh man, yes, this is why my experience is like, it just was what it was. But
yeah, I had the YouTubes.
Oh, see, I didn't have any of that shit. I had dial-up internets. And I remember getting in trouble because we thought we could sneak on one night and that my mom wouldn't notice. And that did not fly.
I didn't even have that, and you're making me feel old. My God.
Oh, yeah, that's right, because Tim's older than all of us. But no, I do find it interesting. So I didn't even, non-binary was not a term that anybody talked about at all, like whenever I was growing up. So like whenever I started kind of coming out about that more recently, because when I started learning about it in Portland, because I knew I wanted to be in Portland well before I actually put together I was non-binary. I'm just like, I'm a dude, like whatever, like, or I'm not, like, I am who I am. I'm Tracy. Like the whole joke behind the movie It's Pat was I'm Pat. I'm Tracy. And it didn't help that I had like a lot of weird jokes made about me in that movie It's Pat, because that was just kind of some of my weird bullying stuff. But so I moved to Portland, and that's when I first actually learned the term like non-binary and what that even meant. And so I kind of put it together really quick. Like once I started like meeting other people, because Tim and I had a mutual friend who was and having conversations with the few people that I did meet that were non-binary, and I thought that was awesome. And then, coming out to my brother was probably the funniest reaction, because he's like, Yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's just that was how deadpan
Well,
it
that's
was.
good.
But the only weird question was like they just expected me to do something different to my body somehow, and it's like, well, but you've got pink hair, and that's very feminine, which is funny because you hated pink as a kid, and I'm like, well, I mean, but like, I also really hated like cream corn and other things. Like, you know, I had phases.
Cream corn.
I'm just saying, like, people change in a lot of ways. Like, even as silly as the taste buds factoid to your preferences. Like, yeah, sure, I used to hate pink. Maybe it was something about struggling with my identity that I didn't understand that was more of the issue. But yeah, like, it's interesting how there was an expectation coming out as non-binary to a few people of like, well, what's this mean? Like, what are you going to change about yourself? And it's like, well, nothing. Like, I'm me. I guess this is how it is, and if there's ever a practical reason to, I will, but I don't feel that for me. And I love hearing people being more and more comfortable, like being able to follow that if that's what they feel is for them, and it's being approached in a kind of a healthy way, which it sounds like you came to that in a way for yourself. Like you said, you'd known like since you were a child. Did you ever talk to any, I don't even know if you've got siblings or anybody close, but did those early conversations go well, like better than you thought for some people?
So one memory I have when I was very young, I must have been 5 or 6, is I used to make these little like books, right? Like you take a piece of paper, you just draw on it, fold it up, and it was a book. And I gave it to my mom, and the book was about a girl who prayed to God to make her a boy, and then she was a boy. And my mom's reading the book, and I just remember she was very like, just very calm. And she gets to the end, and she was like, that's it? I was like, well, yeah. She was like, well, I think the end should be that she asked God to make her back into a girl, and then she lives happily ever after. And I remember thinking, but that's not the story, you know? But
yeah,
and I think
it's your story. That wasn't her
exactly.
story. So there's even a weird level there, like on a weird parenting hitch of mine.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, that wasn't your story to change. Like,
right. So there are layers.
Yeah.
So, you know, I didn't have outward, very explicit conversations when I was young, and I really didn't until I came out to them, which was through an email. We always walked around it awkwardly. It was always tangential to whatever else was going on. Like if it was on the news, you know, like I never talked to them directly about it until I had to. And that is my own issues with confrontation. I was scared to death of the confrontation.
Yeah, I totally like I haven't even told my parents, and the only reason, by the way, the only reason I told my brother, and I told this to my brother when I told him about it, and to Tim I think as well when I told him about it, I was like, oh my god, I just invited my brother to listen to the show where I talk very openly about being non-binary.
So you kind of had to.
I think I just cornered myself into having to have that conversation. And so for me, you know, it wasn't like in the middle of being a child. Like I have no idea how that would go if I even tried to tell my mother.
Is she conservative?
She sure. I think she is now. I'm not even going to pretend that I know her as well anymore, if that makes sense. Like I moved from Texas in 2009. And pretty much since then, we have our lives. It wasn't even great before then, but she does go to church and she takes care of some horses and she does some cool stuff. So I think overall she's a good person, I think. But there has been times where I've hinted at some things, even about, because I consider myself a pansexual person. I've met a lot of genders and identities that I have felt attraction towards and been open towards dating, and one that my friend will still give me a hard time about because they were a stand-up comedian and I just had the hugest crush on them. But I was too scared to say anything to them, so it never ever happened anything, but they were great. But yeah, like I tried to kind of hint at something at one point and she just went, oh, you know, God in this house, and like started, I have no idea, it was just like a waterfall of God and this house and my home, and there's just two of us. Oh yeah. And it was fine. It didn't turn into a don't ever call me again conversation, right? Because those can go really bad. But that was definitely and I think she's had enough of this conversation. And so I just I left it at that. I don't think it would be any mystery to them. I think they're happy that I'm with a dude. Like, but that's just how that landed for me, though.
Yeah. Well, let's. I got a question here I wanted to bring up. You mentioned essentially knowing about this since you were a kid. Now, we have a number of states that are contemplating putting into law, the fact that kids should not have access to like hormone therapy if they do have that decision, if they do know that is a decision they want to make, but they're under the age of 18. Based on your experiences, how dangerous is that going to be?
Man, I mean, those things, watching those news reports come out are just breaking my heart because it's so scary and just counterintuitive to what, Republicans believe in, like not making these laws that would limit personal freedoms.
That just implies that the Republicans believe in something. So.
Yeah. See, they only care about controlling for their narrative.
Totally. And they have made up something that actually isn't a problem, and it's for both big issues for them, which is sports and children accessing hormone replacement therapy or any gender therapy. They're making up an issue, right? Like we're not dealing with kids who are regretting it. And if we are, it's not a significant amount. So these laws that these states are passing, they're not, well, actually they are. They're to protect cisgender kids. They don't care about transgender kids. They act like it's to protect all children. Like, the law states, well, this is to protect children from experimental medicine. But it's not. They only want to protect the small amount of kids who may start taking hormone blockers and then say, you know what, I actually don't want to do that, which then they could just stop taking, right? So the purpose of the medicine, which is to treat trans kids, they're saying is experimental, which is just not true. I mean, hormone replacement therapy, hormone blockers, they have been around for young people for decades. It's not new, but it's new to the media. And so people who had never heard about it are acting like by the hundreds of thousands, kids are going and getting surgeries or having sex changes. Whatever they think is happening is not, I mean, I went through red tape. I went through months of therapy. I had to get letters to have surgery, letters to have hormones. The amount of red tape kids have to go through, I mean, it's not even, I don't know because I was not a kid, but I can only imagine. I mean, it's not, they don't hand it out like candy, that's for sure.
Right.
And it's dangerous just to think if I was a young kid and, I could have transitioned at a young age or I could have stopped puberty. I mean, it would have been amazing. For some kids, it's a lifesaver. And that's really the key for me is 14-year-old kids are contemplating suicide because they can't imagine lives in their bodies. And then these senators who don't know them are just like, we don't like that. We don't agree with your lifestyle or whatever. It's so dangerous and I hate it.
Yeah, I mean, I almost wonder though if some of that, because being a little bit of how the brain works and develops junkie, I am one of those that I do know / understand, like there's long-term things in our brain that don't finish developing until 25. Now, very clearly what I am not saying is that nobody should be able to do this. No. But that is where I get a little bit, because but you're saying any of the hormone therapy isn't going to cause any like long-term issues if it's stopped. So if that's not harming anything, because I know there's even situations where they give hormone therapy to kids like that, it's not because of a transgender thing. It is legitimately because of over hormone production or under hormone production. So you're totally right. This is not experimental stuff. This is stuff we've been doing. We play with hormones every time we take a birth control pill. Like, this is not new.
Absolutely. Now, to be fair, just to be clear about what we're talking about, hormone blockers, from everything I understand, can be stopped and your natural puberty will resume. If you take the quote opposite, you will have changes that will never go back.
Okay.
And that is like a key point to make. I mean, there are things that testosterone will do to you that you can never fix, right? Like, my voice will never, even if I stop tea, my facial hair won't go away. My voice won't go higher.
Gotcha. But they're talking about blockers with kids, which is a totally different thing, is what we're saying.
Yeah. The Republicans are talking about all of it. I think they probably have a problem with like a 16-year-old taking testosterone or estrogen, whichever way, right?
Right.
And I can understand their point, with like the changes and the irreversible changes that they are, and even surgery, right? I mean, do y'all know who Kim Petras is? She's a pop singer. She's kind of been coming up. Yeah. So she's like the first. Was raised in Germany. She was the youngest person to get sex realignment surgery. So, also known as bottom surgery, right? So she was 15 or 16 years old, youngest person in Germany. And that's, I think, what scares Republicans. But even trans people aren't lining up, right? Like that's an intense thing to do. And it doesn't happen on a whim. It happens with, just same thing with abortion. I mean, these things, you don't just wake up and decide to do them. Like, they happen with talking to multiple doctors, talking to multiple people, probably thinking about it for months. Yeah. So again, it's just not a problem that's happening. They're making up this issue in my mind,
Right. And if you're leaving people with this idea that they could never live in a body that they feel comfortable in, or live in a world where they could even feel comfortable talking about doing that someday, it's like, of course, these things would lead to, I don't know, anxiety, leading up to some of the suicidal ideation and stuff. I mean, I know I've been open about the fact that I've attempted once before. That decision doesn't come lightly. Yeah. But it's usually after like a lifetime of dealing with stuff. And if you've been feeling like a stranger in your body for like all of the life that you've known, I could see that feeling very, very dark, right? Like, you don't even have an area where you can talk about it. But that's also where I could totally go on a tangent of how we need to stop tabooing certain conversations and just talk about it so kids can actually have a place to talk. Because really, a lot of this starts when you're a kid, right? And how much nicer would it have been just to have a place where we felt comfortable talking about it? Like, even if I went, you know what, I might not have surgery until I'm like out of high school or something, but I think I'm going to do it. And be comfortable talking about it, because at least then it's like, oh yeah, it's 18, but my parents are all on board. Like, it's cool, we've talked about it, we've got it coming, testosterone or not, but we're not even in that world.
Well, so and like, imagine a world where a 15-year-old girl can come out as a trans girl and she be immediately accepted by everybody.
Yep.
Now, this is clearly not a universal statement, but I can imagine that a lot of kids, if they felt accepted in their gender when they came out, they wouldn't feel the immediate pressing life or death need to start physically transitioning.
Right.
Now, again, not true for everybody. Like, I can absolutely see that could be, someone has to transition, and like, that's totally valid. But so much of this is like the pressures of society, going back to the earlier question, and gender norms and how we're expected to look and talk, and how puberty is expected to go for a girl or expected to go for a boy. I think some people would be perfectly fine waiting. We're also creating pressure around the issue, and we should just let people be them. Like,
Like they'll figure it out. Like
right.
Kids have been kind of good at figuring out who they are when you don't have this weird toxic element of like helicoptery, control-y. It's really narcissistic parenting, but it just manifests in so many different ways that we have so many names for it. But just that idea of, for some reason, picking a different lifestyle or a path is somehow straying from what they would have done, and it gets taken personally sometimes. At least that's some situations, because I do not speak in absolutes. I am not of the Sith. That's as nerdy as I get. I can't even like say that I've watched all those movies, but I still really love that quote about speaking in absolutes. But yeah, but I think like it irritates me because I call it Team Red. I know like Republicans, to me there's like a totally different level of Republican that is just Team Red, and it's just that's the thing that where they get this way about it. But it's like it's Team Red wants to have it just not possible and it not talked about. Like they don't want there to be sex ed that teaches about the body and how one might feel while they're going through these changes in their body and stuff like that. They don't want certain things recognized so therapists can actually be like equipped with the knowledge to help navigate kids through this. Like high school counselors barely have to do any actual counseling type like therapy level, and that's the person you're supposed to go to. And that may have changed because we go to 2003, so that's a long ass time ago. But from what I understand, that's different from place to place what they require for a counselor in middle school and high school. So they don't require any of that either.
Some of the states now, they're trying to pass that if a kid tells their counselor they're trans, the counselor is required by law to tell the parents.
Ooh.
Which is terrifying. I mean, that is outing
horrible.
A child in a dangerous situation. So, and yeah, it's all down to the Team Red. They can't stand queer people. Like I don't. It's just hatred.
It's just control issues. I don't know. That's my big theory with our world, is that when you really think about it, like most of those kind of things that make you go fucking why is like either you trying to control somebody else that's not your business, or somebody trying to control you that's not their business. And it's over little things like that. And that's where, a lot of people say, it's like, oh, it comes from this deep-seated resentment because it was nothing they were allowed to do back in their day. And it's like, yeah, that might be the case for some of them, but some of them just really don't like that somebody made decisions differently than they did, like at all.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that they didn't have that urge or that they didn't have that restriction on them. They just don't want anybody, like, I don't understand it. It's a way of being that I don't understand, but it seems to be driving a lot of the conversation on that Team Red side, which has gotten louder. I mean, obviously with like some of the stuff going on, there's kind of a lot of anti-trans stuff going on with sports and things like that in some states. So they're loud, and I think they're just mad that Biden's our president. But that's just my IMHO digression on that one. But yeah, that sounds horrible. Like policies like that are not. Come on, tell me in what world is that policy actually made to protect kids?
It's not, because in my opinion, with the Republicans, they are a political party for the very, very rich. And to be able to get other people involved in supporting that, they need wedge issues, whether it's misrepresenting an actual issue or creating stuff out of thin air. They will blanket the airwaves with absolute lies in order to get people. And I'm not going to call them dumb. I'm not going to go through some of the old stereotypes on that. It's just we got to acknowledge that with the news bubble the way it can be, especially in rural parts of the country that don't have as much access to the internet, thanks to broadband access, they just simply don't know that a lot of times that these are lies. But that's the dangerous part, because they hear this, it's different than what they're seeing, in their own homes, and they just get scared. And it's unfortunately that's how they get into power. But I wanted to ask, I assume you were not born with the name Elias. How did you come up with that name? Was there a big ceremony, or was it just as simple as finding a baby name book and going to eat?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wanted to keep my initials, so I wanted something that aligned. So I I originally wanted to go by Elijah, and well, actually, that's not true. It was actually Eli. Eli was it, and the story behind that is I was in my first drag show at 16. I was a drag king, but I had no idea what I was doing, and they were like, "Hey, what's your drag king name?" And I was like, Eli. And they were like, "Eli what?" And I was like, "Just Eli," which is like the worst drag name. But anyway, that stuck, and I liked it, and so I wanted to go by Eli.
Sorry, that is so awesome. Like, I've only been to a few drag shows ever, but I could just kind of see that in my head playing out because of my experience with some drag people. But please continue.
Right. Like, here's Karen from finance. Here's Lucy Lou Montgomery. Here's Eli. And, like, that's it. So I wanted to go by Eli, but when I wanted to change my name, I was like, I don't want to change my name to Eli. That's boring. So I thought about Elijah, but then that didn't sit right with me. It just, didn't fit. And I was driving down the road, and there was this church. It was like a Greek Orthodox church, and it was called Saint Elias. And I was like, ooh, Elias. That's cool. So literally it was a name I saw on the road that I thought was cool. That's pretty much how I came up with that.
I mean, I guess at least it wasn't from the old Elias Brothers Big Boy, driving and seeing the diner on the road, but.
Or it's a very 1800s name, I feel like.
Well, think back a few years though. I mean, there was that Book of Eli film with Denzel Washington, and I mean,
true.
He made Eli cool for a while.
Such a good movie. Sorry, just total sidetrack there. Fucking bomb diggity movie.
It is a good movie.
So, I mean, you're from kind of a religious area, though, right?
Oh yeah.
So, are you still religious, or is that something that not really part of your life, or was it ever really?
I'm a big old atheist. I used to, when I was very young, I was religious. But I was also really into science, and so was my dad. And so, for example, at my school, we were actually taught evolution was not true, and that it was a lie. That people lived with the dinosaurs, but they died in the flood. I mean, these are legitimate conversations I had in high school.
Oh wow.
But when I was young, I really liked dinosaurs. I loved dinosaurs. And so my parents would buy me dinosaur books, which talked about evolution. And so I basically taught myself evolution, which made my teachers very upset. They did not like it.
Oh,
they would, totally nerdy thing. When I was in 5th grade, I created a website with my dad's help called learnaboutdinosaurs.com. It no longer exists. But I would basically find a picture on Google of a dinosaur and then write a tiny little blurb about it. And I showed it to my class, and the first page says, 65 million years ago, or whatever. And my teacher turns it off and looks at me and says, "The world is only 6,000 years old." And I was like, right. Yes, sorry. That was a typo.
Oh, forgot my crowd.
So anyway, needless to say, I was raised very religious. I realized in college that it did not resonate with me and that it really didn't make sense in my worldview. So yeah, I'm an atheist.
I mean, I've met other people who they did maintain their religious beliefs. So I kind of was curious if that was your case.
And I did in college. I was able
to.
I found a church in Atlanta that was very, very accepting and wonderful, and they were great people. And I would go with my then wife, and we would go and had a great time. And then at some point we were like we're lying to these people. We don't actually believe any of this. We're just going because it's what we're used to, and we enjoy the community. But when we stand up and do these prayers, we don't believe it, and that's just not fair, Yeah,
you were raised around it, so it just kind of was a part of your life, but it wasn't anything that you necessarily felt like you had to shut out right away. So did you kind of know you were atheist the whole time and just going through the parts? Sorry, I know this is a little bit off of the topic, but in my head it's all kind of related.
No, I think it was a weird transition, no pun intended, because we were going to a church that was so accepting. And I think initially, it's easy for queer people to be like, well, I'm going to leave the church because I'm not accepted. And that's a very easy out for people. But for us, it wasn't. So me and my wife, when I say we were going through the similar situation of we were raised religious. It meant something to us at one point in our life. And then we were trying we knew we didn't believe it, philosophically anymore, but it was so hard to let go because, I mean, one, religious trauma is a thing. So
Ew.
that was, yeah. So that was
totally.
definitely a part of it. Because we had to go through a whole stage of even saying we didn't believe in God. That, like, at one point physically hurt us. We were like, well, like, we literally couldn't say it because we would be going to hell, right? So yeah, it was a weird thing, but eventually it was just like, it's just, we can't be lying to these very, very kind, loving people. They were amazing, and I still talk to a lot of them from that specific. So I definitely think it's possible. I love religious queer people. I love when that happens. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's something that I'm actually very happy to say that I've seen. My brother and I were having a conversation of we'll be a product of our time at some point too, and I was like, you know what? I'll be fine with being a product of my time if I keep seeing the progress that I've seen. Because like just 10 years later, like, oh my God, there's no way I would have found a church. Like, even if I knew what the term non-binary meant and was open with being, even I knew I was bisexual like through high school and like I think even middle school when I think back on it. But like that did not exist in my area of Texas. So, and there's more places that do now. And that's been honestly something really refreshing. I just had like the bullying bullshit just carried over into my religious trauma and just like went on. I made the lovely decision of going to a Christian university on top of some other decisions, and that was not necessarily the place I was going to thrive. So, I learned a lot about myself. It wasn't the best way to learn, but I learned a lot. But yeah, so it really is. It's kind of refreshing because even like my time in college, like moving away to a slightly bigger Texas town, like no, I knew zero openly anything, people, nothing. Like I still kind of felt like a freak. Like I felt like I was hiding. Like I wasn't at all where I belonged the entire time I was there. So yeah, it's nice to know that some of that is changing. Let's just make fun of Tim for being older. He's probably even got even more memories of like stuff changing over time with some of the possible acceptance. But you weren't in a highly religious area though, were you, Tim?
Compared to Texas and Georgia, no. But Michigan has its. I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and if anything, if you had to describe it, it's kind of more of a purple place. It's not hardcore, ultra conservative, but it's conservative enough. You got a lot of people that will look down their nose upon you, but they'll still talk to you.
Yeah, like Arizona was amazingly more like maroonish than red. Like I thought it was like, oh, that's cute. Y'all think you're conservative.
You
like
don't
in
even
Phoenix.
know.
I was like, is he wearing a rainbow tube top and cutoff shorts? Oh, honey, bless your heart. That was like literally the first time I ever saw like that much publicly like open with not meeting those stereotypes was like moving to Arizona in 2009, and I graduated high school in 2003, so that was still a long time to wait to see people even bothering to express themselves in a way that was different.
Now, you had mentioned, Tracy, that you wanted to bring up pronouns.
Yes, because I've mentioned that I worked in tech world before, and something that they had really embraced at one point was, and I know this happened at the job that Elias and I had together, was there was this whole trend of your name tag and your signature and it saying, he, her, him, he. So I was curious because I think we had kind of talked about this, you and I, at one point. I think we kind of reacted differently to it. But what was your overall feeling like when that started being a trend in the office?
Yeah, so funny enough, I was actually part of the team that made that happen.
Oh, so cool. This is even better.
Yeah, so I was in the, the association, I don't know, like the inclusion kind of, they were wanting to make the office more inclusive. And so one of the things that we brought up was pronouns and creating a more inclusive environment for trans people. And I had to do this in very sneaky ways because I was not necessarily out at work. I was out to a few people, and if you were friends with me on Facebook, you knew I was trans. I was out as queer. Like, everyone knew I was gay. not everybody knew I was trans. And so I didn't necessarily want to out myself, but I also wanted to work on this thing that was important to me. And so I kind of did it through proxy people. Like I was like, hey, you know what would be cool if we had pronouns? And they'd be like, oh yeah, okay, I'll talk to so-and-so. So it got to, up to marketing or whatever. And then they made the decision of how, they had to format it a certain way, which is hilarious to me. But yeah, I mean, I love it. It makes me and I'll clarify, a binary trans person feel safe. Like if I see pronouns in someone's signature, I'm like, okay, they took the time to know why this was important and added it to their signature. Because it wasn't forced on anyone, right? There were many people in the office who had no interest in doing it in any capacity. But there were a lot of people who were like excited about it. So yeah, I really liked it. But I am curious about your thoughts, considering that, you were not out at all. So yeah.
Right. What's funny is I think we surprised each other about that because I literally had no clue until I became friends with you on Facebook and started seeing stuff. And then I think when we chatted a while back ago, that was when I was like, yeah, like I wasn't out at work, but hi, non-binary.
Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah.
Like, hey-o. And I've really only just gotten more comfortable talking about that. So I will preface this whole internal reaction with, was I necessarily comfortable saying, hey, I'm non-binary? Like, no, I was not there yet. And I will definitely give kudos that on an official capacity, it was not pressured on anybody. So I will totally talk about my experience being somebody who didn't necessarily want to do it, and like some of the interesting feedback I got from other people that weren't on an official capacity. So yeah, like I did think it was cool, like at first. Because I am big on it. If you want to be you, be you. I also have a little bit, and this could be because, conservative Texas, a little bit of it probably got in there. But I'm a little bit of, if it doesn't matter to me doing my job, I just don't think it matters. But that's for me. That's why it's like, yeah, like I don't need anybody to change my name, whatever. Tracy was already gender neutral anyway, and it kind of served me in the role that I was doing, since a lot of it was by email, and it helped me do my job to be, but yeah, so I saw that come out, and at first I was like, oh, do I have to do this? It just like kind of made me scared for a second, because I was like, I don't want to, like, because I think I'm like spinning up to being cool about accepting this big thing of myself, but I don't know if I'm like there, like, because at that point I'd had years of suspicion, but not quite having those conversations. Like I very much considered myself non-binary in my head though, but just didn't really know how to have those conversations, right? But so then it turned into, eventually people will notice that you're not doing it. So time passes after, like, it's the thing, and everybody's changed. It's like, Tracy, I know you haven't updated your signature yet. Like, are you going to update your signature? And I'm like, I hadn't planned on it. And even at some of the women in tech groups, because, and I love them, by the way, so this is all praise. And they were, again, never pressured it. But I don't know if you went to any of those, but you'd put he, she, him, her. And then like my other thing about it was I hadn't learned any different pronouns yet. So they is like many in my head. So I didn't even know what to put, was some of the other confusion. And now it's like we've got Z in here, and I really love that. I love that it doesn't make me feel like I'm many people anymore. Like Z is on her way is not like they're on their way, and then I show up and I'm like, oh, it's just you. Like, because that's that you laugh, but that has happened before, and it's like, oh, okay, my ego totes needed that. So there was a little bit of weird, but I mean, any office that's big enough is not guilt-free of a little bit of the weird hierarchy, almost like high school bullyish stupid shit. Like you can't, like, once you get so big, you just can't stop it. And I don't know, like I've always attracted kind of that little bit of like, if anybody's got any mean girl about them, they're gonna find me. Like I super attract mean girl attitude, and maybe I've worked on that / left offices now because I'm just done with it. But yeah, like it was kind of, that was the situation that was going on, was this person was kind of like oddly trying to pressure me, and I didn't know if like maybe I gave a vibe to them and they were trying to encourage me, but it did not come off that way. And I had very recently before then had like an awkward situation where somebody had found out my sexuality on Tinder and had been talking about it in one of the other departments. So like it was just really bad timing for me on that one. And I was also like not dealing with like I was already spinning up to quitting anyway. So
You make a good point though, is that and as a binary trans person, again, I hadn't even really thought about this, which is my bad.
By the way, no offense taken to anybody if anybody ever makes those decisions. Like, to me personally, I get that we're all trying our best here.
Sure. But I mean, in order, the email signatures, I mean, they can possibly out gender queer non-binary people, right? Because you're then in a position where you either put your pronouns in your email signature and then everyone knows you're trans, or you don't and you get misgendered all day.
Or the other one is they think you're an asshole for not doing it, which was the other weird thing that I felt was going on. And even looking at, and granted, the whole Gina Carrera thing turned into a whole thing, but like she had been pressured to change hers, and that's what started a lot of that fighting. And early on, I had speculated that I wondered if perhaps she was non-binary or something, and had just put something to be a smartass, because that's what I had been tempted to do. And now see, because of the work filter, I know better. Do not be a smartass when unnecessary in the work field. So I just decided not to change anything. But was there a little bit, and it wasn't just one person, like I joke about mean girl person, but there was like a few people who asked, that I very genuinely sometimes felt like, are you trying to figure out if I'm an asshole? Or are you just trying to figure out like if I'm just like not ready to out myself? Because that still in a sense is kind of making me feel cornered, where I had to out myself. And that was nothing to do with why I ultimately left the job, but it definitely felt awkward. And I don't know if I was the only one, but it's so tricky though, right? Because it's all of the best intentions, and it can still accidentally make somebody feel like that weird pressure.
Totally. Yeah. It's a hard place to be, if you're inclusive, you're also kind of excluding people to an extent. Like there's this weird like tug of war.
Yeah, tug of war.
that you go through, right? Like, it's rough.
Yeah.
But I hate that you got outed at work. I actually got outed at work too. And it was an awful experience, and
it really wasn't that bad though, by the way. And it didn't even really ever culminate to me being outed, because that happened all so close to when I left that I kind of just left.
Gotcha.
So it worked out in a way, like in the timing of everything. But there's like I will totally emphasize it had nothing to do with that. It was everything to do with disorganization on a total other stupid shitty level. So it had nothing to do with being inclusive. If anything, overall, I really thought it was a cool thing. And and I love that there was no pressure. It's like, oh, don't forget to update your thing. Like that would have been really annoying. Like just send like a mailer every 3 weeks.
It was one email, and like literally was never spoken of. And it was nice because there were people who surprised me that I honestly like wouldn't have thought that like the person at that level, maybe not executive, but like VP level even, like that they were doing it like that. It made me feel good. I was like, okay, like to me it reads I'm a safe person, even if maybe they're not. But like to me it's like, okay, like you get it. Whereas there were people who did not do it, that were in positions of power, and that made me not okay. You know what I mean? I was like, okay, you are not a safe person, because I know why you're not. Well, let me be fair. Maybe I was assuming. Maybe they're non-binary. Could be.
Right. Like we never know, right?
Of you don't. But from what I know of them, I don't think that was the case.
I think I know kind of, because we ran in that same circle.
I think you know. I'm not.
Yeah. It's some awkward conversations.
So anyway. Yeah. But no, I hear you, and I appreciate that perspective. And it's a thing we need to talk about. We need to be open about talking about shit like that. Like, like.
Because hey, I wasn't on the committee, or I probably would have found some weird sly way to have snuck that in. They're like, hey, I not for me, but for a friend I know, they might not want to out themselves yet at work.
Exactly.
So can we cover not pressuring anybody to do this? Like, just somehow, like, as a sub memo, like, don't go up asking people, have you changed it yet? But yeah, like, it stinks because you do think it could be as easy as like, oh yeah, like that person's so supportive because like I know Susan's a she, but she still put she her, and that's being supportive. And so there was like a weird little level of like I didn't know if I was being judged on either level at that point, and it was just oddly I didn't even expect that. Like honestly, I think if you had sat me in that room and like say we were like really good friends and you happen to know this about me, and if you had said, hey, like Tracy, I'm thinking about like making this suggestion, like what's sad is I'd probably still have supported it and had no idea how uncomfortable it would have made me until the situation was actually going on. So there's that part too, but you just have to respect people trying their best. Like it wasn't to make me uncomfortable, right? Like I didn't take it personally, and I loved that I seemed to be in the minority. Like I will always be okay with like, oh, okay, I can deal with it. Like a bunch of people aren't upset. Like it's just me. All right, cool. So well, I have one question, just real quick, just kind of speaking on like pronouns and stuff like that. Like, do you ever get like I guess really because you've kind of come to a point where people do tend to view you as he, right? Like that seems to be the assumption, because that's the thing, right? It's like people assume upon looking at you that you are blank. And sometimes people do look, and what's funny is some people who have never had any form of like hormone intervention sometimes look very either effeminate or masculine, whatever you want to call it. But how do you react, or if you were mispronounced early on, like how did you generally react to that? I'm just curious. Or the thoughts on mispronouncing people when it's, I don't know, not on purpose. Like they're not being mean about it.
Oh, yeah. It was rough. It was really hard, especially when you get to the point, when you're, a baby and person and you're like, okay, I'm ready to take the jump. I'm ready to transition. I'm ready to start hormones. Here we are. And then you get sheed everywhere you go. It was rough, really, really hard. And it would make me not want to go out places. It would make me not want to see my friends. It would make me not want to be around my family because they couldn't, and like, I've, grown a lot, but I still get misgendered. Like, example, in quarantine with all these masks, like, over the winter, I went to the grocery store in, like, a big jacket and a mask, and I got ma'amed. Because for whatever reason, right? Like it literally could be nothing. And I still take it personally. It still hurts for a minute. Not as much as it used to. It makes you question, you're like, what did I do? Are my hips too big? Am I too short? It's my hands. My hands are so small. It's like these stupid little things that like really don't freaking matter. And it's like that person, maybe they just didn't look at cash register, and they just saw like a body and just like, it usually is nothing, especially at this point in my transition. But early on, it definitely was hard.
Oh, yeah. Because it's like, I know I had a friend that, transitioned. And when it happened, though, like, we weren't living near, like, we weren't hanging out as much as we used to because I had moved. And so for me, it's like, oh, man, but I could see me. It was weird to see it as a positive that I wasn't there. Because I know I have a hard time, like, with, like, even nickname changes. I've had a rough time with that. Like, I've got a friend or had a friend that was, like, really triggered by, like, a high school nickname that was always what we called them. And I had the hardest time even changing that. I was like, man, so I could see that being really hard, and I wouldn't want, my friend to feel like I wasn't respecting what they were going through or anything. So it was really weird for me to process it that way. But so I haven't had to be in that position to have to make that switch, and that's something that I try to be careful about with people. Like, even going into it like a little bit more jokingly for hyperbole at the beginning of the show, I try to be incredibly respectful of people. And I know, like, and maybe it's a little bit of the empath part or whatever, I am mortified if I offend somebody. Like, I just, it's never my intention. I don't want anybody to feel bad about themselves. Like, back in Texas, when there was really no excuse, looking at me, I definitely looked like a she, right? I got teed sometimes, like going into like Walmart, and I'm like, is it just something about my aura? Like, I don't understand. Like,
No, it was Walmart. It was Walmart.
It was Walmart.
But I was just an example of a store, right? Like, so it was weird that happened to me a lot. And even talking to some of my friends, like whenever I started coming out about being non-binary, it's like, it's weird that that seems right for you. Like, it's like, is there like a vibe that you get? I don't get it. But I've had friends, I was like, hey, like, just so you know, like, I'm non-binary. I've totally been non-binary. Sorry, I'm just telling you this now, though. And they just get like mortified and they feel horrible. It's like, oh my God, I've misgendered you for years. And it's like the way that I've learned to come out is like, oh, it's cool. Like, I don't really think being either gender is offensive. So it's totally fine. Go. Like, dudes are cool. Like, men are cool people and women are cool people. So I don't know. I love Z in here. And I'm even kind of open to just like opening with that with people. But then I don't want to like open up with a fight with somebody that doesn't understand what it means. But because it's not even that they're non-binary terms. They're just gender neutral terms. Okay. So that's what I dig about it. I had a friend bring up a point that they didn't like, that they were so similar to what we had. Like, I was confused on what they wanted there, but I like that more people are talking about it. Demi Lovato came out as being non-binary.
I saw that.
I was really hoping that they would pick up the Z here pronoun, since they're becoming kind of a little bit cooler. They're being talked about a little bit more, but so far they're going by they. Like, I thought about like, hey, help raise some awareness. Z and here. We are not many people.
Yeah, right.
And then, of course, Elliot Page. Look what's happened with him.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for Elliot Page. Like,
and
like,
he goes by he and they.
Yeah, he.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Tim, unless you had anything else.
Yeah, I was gonna ask one. Yeah, I was gonna ask one more question here. How can people be better allies to the trans community?
Great question. Big question. I mean, I think listening to trans people and supporting trans people, trying to stop these horrible laws, and not just sitting around thinking that everything's okay, because it's not. I mean, I think, God, how many people? I think, I'm not going to get the number right, so I'm not even going to guess, but over a dozen trans women have been murdered this year, and it's June, and I mean murdered as in most very likely a hate crime, and like that's just the reality. I mean, I think the average age of a Black trans woman is 34 or something like that. I mean, it's the reality of trans people, though it's getting better. The visibility also makes it more dangerous. I mean, the more we talk about it, the more we talk about what, my friend and I were just talking about this the other day. They on some TV show, they had top surgery scars, and it made him nervous because he was like, well, now people are going to know what top surgery scars look like. Whereas before, they wouldn't have even crossed their mind. I'm like, well, fuck, you're right. Now that makes us visible as trans people, and that's dangerous at the end of the day.
It outs you without your permission. Like, that's a conversation you should have with somebody that you care about and maybe even trust, I would say. Like,
absolutely. Yeah. So, just understanding what's happening in the world, listening, supporting, and being friends with us because we're cool. And my theory is that it all comes down to, like, if you're transphobic or you feel icky about trans people, it's because you don't know one. And if you just like met a trans person, you would realize like we're just as boring and just as weird as anyone else, and it's not because we're trans. Like, that is just a part of us. And the more people understand that, I think it will be easier, and more acceptance will happen. Because that's what happened to my parents, right? Like they're my best friends. They're my number one supporters. They were transphobic in the past, but it took them knowing and loving a trans person to change them.
Yeah, and that's really awesome too.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
I wanted to say one small thing to add out there is like, I don't know, the decisions on our bodies is really not a reflection of anything you've ever chosen in your life. To anybody who is offended by us people out here just trying to live ourselves, and that's why living a little loud is a thing too. Like, I want people to be comfortable to say I'm non-binary. I want people to be comfortable in this world. Like, me saying I'm non-binary, you saying that you've transitioned, that is not meant to make any cis person uncomfortable. Like, that is not the intention there. The intention there is to let somebody know, like, hey, if you want to talk about this, I'm here. Like, that's why some of us want to talk about it and be open about it. And I know I've been extremely happy and pleased to have my voice, and it's got to be really refreshing to be able to live in the body that you feel like you should have had, like, for a very long time.
And I mean, best decision of my life. Yep, sure.
Well, there we go. Well, thank you for being on the show and taking the time to talk here. And for everybody listening at home, tune in again next week. We thank you all for listening, and we'll wrap it up here. We thank you all for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.